shooting with the Sony A1 in SLog 3, first native ISO of 600, and the log version before the LUT and the simple grade look like this. If we convert this scene with decent dynamic range into black and white, what would the negative look like? I think it would be this, because a well-exposed zone system negative is very flat and even. It's mostly midtones. There's no deep dark areas which would be blown out whites, and very little clear areas which would be blacks without detail. This allows you to expand those areas in post, which was the darkroom, with paper grades and development to their optimum dynamic range. We used to call that print brilliance. So it's really obvious to me that the idea for log format is really coming from the zone system, whether you go back to Kodak's early film scanners, or Arri, or Sony messing with the gamma curves before they had SLog. It all really starts with a black and white negative in the early 30s and 40s. And if you want to know how I arrived at that conclusion, the thorough explanation follows. I started in 1990. All advertising was color transparency to drum scan. You had to have 3 formats, 4x5, medium, and 35mm, which wasn't even really pro gear unless you were doing high-level photojournalism or sports. But there was still a lot of black and white and a lot of creative use cases for that. And in terms of the fine arts, it was still celebrated in galleries and museums. I would go into New York at ICP when they featured Magnum, or some of the old Western zone system guys like Ansel Adams, Minor White. And I was blown away by the print brilliance of some of these silver halide, selenium-toned, 50-year-old masterpieces. And that was because they all used the zone system, or a similar theory, in their processing, which was exposed for the shadows and developed for the highs. Basically, you're creating a value step scale in camera with f-stop, shutter speed development, and printing. This was the only way to create high dynamic range in black and white photography because manufacturers would lie about their film speeds as a marketing tool. They would post them way higher than what they actually were. For example, this celebrated 3200 was actually 800 when zoned properly. If you'd expose it at 3200, you'd have no shadow detail, and film was notorious for having poor shadow detail and great highs. This is why early Hollywood films were super overlit. They didn't have to worry about protecting their highs, they just needed to keep their shadows. I think film noir played a part in that. If we don't have a budget to rent the amount of lights that's required to produce shadow detail, let's just lean into it and make our weakness a strength. Now it's art. Fast forward 60 years and Instagram basically did the same thing. Early cell phone cameras sucked, we're a little bit early, and there's nothing we can do about it. So Instagram filters were born to take that which sucks and make it suck more as part of the creative process until tech catches up. But as a working pro, that's never been my focus. I want maximum dynamic range. I want the most technically accurate color science and exposure possible. So, in the early 90s, I began a deep dive into the zone system. Had to learn it through books. Took me about 6 years. So let's say we wanted to make a black and white fine print of this shot. There's a nice range from black to white. How do we place all those values in their proper zones? Back in the day, that was with a spot meter. We got white shirts, we got black pants in shadow with detail. Now spot meters, or meters in general, place everything in a zone 5 or a middle gray. Here I'm using an 11-step value scale, so my middle will be about 6. And since zone system is exposed for the shadows developed for the highs, I want to have shadow detail in that black. So if I meter that black, and I get at ISO 3200 1/25th of a second f2.8, then that's the exposure zone to have that area at middle gray. But I don't want that at middle gray. I want that at almost a black, but I want some shadow detail. So I'll place it at around a zone 3. And that's how I expose for the whole scene at f8. If this was a black and white zone system exposed negative on a light table, it would look something like this. Now we have shadow detail where we want it, and we pull those highs in development, shortening the time to control those whites, so there's detail in those too. And that's the essence of the zone system. The negative should be a uniform, even value, not too dark, not too light. This gives you control of all the values, which you can then expand in the printing process on graded paper. Now what does that remind you of? If we take away the LUT and the grade and look at it as it was shot in SLog 3, you get this. Exposing for your shadows, protecting your highs with zebras and gamma assist, so you can expand it in post into this.